US edition of the vBrownBag. Tonight we're going to be talking about vCloud Automation Center version 6 and its extensibility with John Harris, otherwise known as the VCAC guy on Twitter. So my name is Damian Carlson. Again, I think I already just said that, but if you've known me for a while, you know that I'm kind of an idiot. So that being said, all self-deprecation aside, a few quick notes before we get started with the show. Due to the nature of the webinar platform, we definitely encourage you to get on Twitter, follow the hashtag vBrownBag. You can tweet any number of the different vBrownBag Twitter accounts that we have. We've got at vBrownBag, at vBrownBag Latam, as in L-A-T-A-M for Latin America, and then vBrownBag EMEA. You can find all of our recordings and all of our general things that have been going on over the past few years at professionalvmware.com/brownbags, and there you'll find show notes and recordings from the different vBrownBag properties that we run around the world. We've got Asia Pacific, EMEA, Latin America, and this one, the US version. Another quick thing I wanted to throw out there, professionalvmware.com, I think I said that 47 times already, but we're looking for guest bloggers. So if you're interested in guest blogging about something technical related to virtualization software, VMware, a specific product, something technical like, hey, how to configure this cool storage I bought, etc. As long as it's not marketing, because, yeah, we're not really all about marketing. You can get enough of that somewhere else. But, if you'd like to contribute some technical blog articles, feel free to hit us up on the hashtag at vBrownBag. So there we have it. And now, Mr. John Harris, you are now unmuted. Hooray. I can mute and unmute presenters. How's that?
Dude, that's awesome.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah, I can walk and chew gum. So, like I said, I already made you the organizer. Oh, yeah, one more thing. My brain is just not working today. If you have any questions, feel free to throw a note into the chat or raise your hand within the webinar or send me a question directly. I believe those are the two separate things that you can do with regard to sending in questions. And I'll interrupt John as we go along, and we'll be able to get those questions answered. He is in a public space, so there's a little bit of a background noise, so I apologize, but sometimes we've got to do what we've got to do. So, John, I'm going to make you presenter.
Okay.
See what kind of rabble-rousing is going on the Twitters, and feel free to start your thing.
All right. Can everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen, yes, Damien?
Yes,
awesome.
I can.
Awesome. Okay, so basically tonight I'm gonna cover a couple of different topics. So far in the vBrownBag, we've done a couple of different things with VCAC 6. We went around and we did one that was like, hey, let's deploy the base components, which was your identity appliance, the VCAC appliance, which is the new cafe interface that kind of overlays over the top, and then the infrastructure as a service component, which is basically the existing Windows box that sits off to the side and does a lot of the .NET type stuff, and and still kind of runs that infrastructure as a service component in VCAC 6. And then we also went through a session around kind of configuring, things like fabric groups, setting up tenants, things of that sort. Today I'm going to talk about a couple other topics. I'm briefly going to cover, so there's a new product out there called ITBM Standard, and that actually comes in an appliance, and it can be pointed at VCAC, and then when you point it at VCAC, it goes through and it's got information in it around, like the different hardware costs and stuff out there, and it can kind of pre-populate information into VCAC and kind of populate that into a thing called cost profiles, and basically be able to allow you to kind of, without having to kind of go through like chargeback, which at times can be difficult for some customers because you got to go in and you got to define every little thing. Standard kind of has an idea about what, on average these things should cost, and it will kind of populate that information for you. And so that plugs into VCAC, and then it'll give you some looks as to, okay, my private cloud, opposed to Amazon and Azure would cost X. It kind of gives you like a cost comparison type of thing. And different things like that, you know. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop into what we call the Advanced Services Designer. So basically, that's basically the part of the solution that's around what we call this X as a service, if you want to, you know, play buzzword here. And so that's what allows us to go in and basically front-end VCO and take workflows that are in there and make it so that we can take those workflows and turn them into services that people can consume just like they can infrastructure as a service through vCAC. So those are the two components I'm going to cover today. So as far as the ITBM component, it's basically just an appliance just like your identity appliance and your vCAC appliance. You go and you deploy that appliance. Once you've deployed it, you know, you IP it, and that's during the deployment of the OVF. And then what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with, you know, the same, you know, appliance interface that you get with most of the VMware appliances. So you're going to log into this deal here. Give me a second.
So John, what does ITBM stand for?
IT Business Management, I believe it is.
Yep. And the deployment of the ITBM appliance, does that follow the same you know, OVF deployment where you have to set the properties in it as you go, much like the other one?
Yeah, so it's the same type of deal, basically. You go into, like if you're doing it for vSphere, unfortunately I'm doing it in a nested environment here at VMware, so mine's actually in vCloud Director. But yeah, you just go and you deploy the OVF. You know, you go through the wizard, it asks for the properties and things around, you know, do you want it thin provision, thick provision, give it an IP address, that type of thing, and then you power it on. And then the first time you power it on, if you go to the console, you do have an option to change the currency. It defaults to US, but you can change it to some different currencies and stuff. And so that's kind of where we would be at here. And then once you have that, then you basically browse to the IP or the FQDN if you actually have a host record out there for the box. You log into it and use the 5480, which is pretty standard on the appliances. And then from there, you kind of walk through a config. So you can kind of go over here to system. You're going to want to make sure you have the time zone set. You want to make sure all the time zones on all these different appliances are correct and in sync, because that could cause issues. And then you're going to go over to the network component, and you want to go ahead and give it a host name. I think by default this is like local.something. So you go in here and give it a host name. You can change any of the IP information, save the settings, and then you would go over to this vCloud Automation Center tab here. And basically, so if you guys, so in vCAC when you set it up, there's a thing called the default tenant. You set that up when you're setting up the vCAC. Actually, I think that's actually in the identity appliance, but there's this default tenant, and when you set that information up, there'd be like an administrator at vSphere.local, and you give it a username and a password. And so when you're setting up this to connect to your vCloud Automation Center instance, you basically go in here and you give it the host name, so the FQDN, you give it the default tenant, and then you give it that administrator username and password. You can go and view the certificate here, and then you probably want to accept that certificate, and then you're going to hit register here. And what ends up happening is now, so now this ITBM instance is aware of your vCAC instance. And so from that point on, what you can do is you would be logging in here to your vCloud Automation Center. You're going to want to be, obviously, to start when you're configuring it, so you're going to go into your tenant, right? And you're going to want to log in, and you need to have an account. So basically what you have to do is go into administration here. And for instance, I already have a group here that's defined, that's private cloud managers, right? And what you need to do is there's actually a role, there's a couple of different roles here, and one of them is this business management administrator. So in order for somebody to actually be able to go in and configure the business management piece, well, you make them an administrator. If you want them to be able to just be able to read the content and see what's there, well, you give them the business management read-only user. And so you can create different groups in there and assign them these roles. And what happens then is when they log in, if you see here, they get this business management tab. And this business management tab here is where it's actually, that's where you view the stuff from the ITBM appliance. So for instance, the other thing you do need to do when you're setting this up is there's this business management under administration here. And so you've pointed it at, you've pointed the ITBM appliance to your vCAC, but then now it kind of needs to know about the different vCenters or VCD instances out there. So what you do is you actually go into here under Manage vCenter Connections, and you go in and you provide it the credentials for your vCenter. And then you could also do the same. Let me, I need to move this GoToMeeting thing off to the side here. And if you go down here, you could also do the same with vCloud Director connections. And so once it's actually knows about that information, then when you click on this Business Management tab, what you end up getting is you get this dashboard. And so you've got an overview, and it's basically saying, okay, this is your total, cost, cloud costs per month. And it goes through and identifies, okay, so, 29% of it is OS licensing, and 12%, is net, or, all these different, slices of the pie here. 12% that's server hardware, and then you can go in and you can drill into these, and it goes and it tells you, here's the actual costs. And so what it's doing is it's using basically it's got this information that it pulled down about industry standard costs, and it pulls that information in and it kind of gives you a cost comparison. So, I mean, I know a lot of organizations have that issue where internally they're like, okay, so how am I, they start going through this process of, okay, now we're going to do self-service, right? And we want to do chargeback or showback, but they have to go through this process to find out, okay, so what are my average operational costs? What is this costing me? What is it costing me to have the hardware? What is it costing me to do X, Y, Z? And so what ITBM offers is it's going to give you that, or at minimum, it's going to give you an industry standard of what that would cost. It may not be your exact ones because you may have some crazy business process internally that's negating that, but it's going to give you an idea of what that is. And so you've got that overview tab. There's things like there's a public cloud tab here, and what it does is it actually, well, give it a second to load here. And bear with me here. This is in a nested lab, so sometimes things can be a little slow.
So I've got a couple questions while we're waiting.
Sure, shoot. I'll try to answer them.
Is vCloud Automation Center a prerequisite for ITBM?
Okay, so there are multiple versions of ITBM. There's an ITBM standard, which is this new one that they just put out. And then there's an advanced and enterprise. So the advanced and enterprise ones, no. This version of ITBM, which is the ITBM standard, yes, it connects directly into vCAC.
And is that wrapped up in the vCloud Enterprise license like vCAC 6 is?
So interestingly enough, no.
I'm not trying to ask one question. Even though
it's not. I think they've got a. No, I got you. Interestingly enough, that is not the case currently. I do know that they've got some like promos and stuff that say, if you buy X amount of sockets, we're going to provide you so many licenses of it. So there are initiatives around that, but currently, no, it is not part of the suite.
Gotcha. And when you were connecting vCenter and vCloud Director earlier, is that
go ahead?
Is that only for endpoints that are managed by vCloud Automation Center, or can you, gather it from VCD even if vCAC was only connected to vSphere? Does that make sense?
You know what? I think those are two separate things. So I believe you could, but I would not quote me on that. I'm going to have to go try that myself
Okay.
and find the answer to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I was just curious. I was considering smacking my head on the desk if you had to put in your endpoints that vCAC already knew about, but you know, sometimes these things happen.
Yeah, no, and it does seem like that. Like when I first set this up, I should have looked at the documentation, but I didn't. I just kind of winged it. You know, and I ran into the same thing. Like I was like, why is this thing not populating data, right? But the minute you actually go in and you feed it the vCenter, then it starts pulling in the data and the costs and everything. So unfortunately, it would make better. And I can look more into it because, granted, I'm still kind of new to this product too, and see if there's something I'm missing. But it does seem like you do have to add those in manually. It would be nice if it actually knew about those things already, you know?
Right.
And then the other thing I just,
you know,
go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I was going to make a comment about another product where it was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why do we have to do that? But that's neither here nor there because it's a little bit off topic. I've got a couple other questions here related to showing costs for add-on services like backup. And then another question about, if you can put cost info on a VM tag, if it'll show up. And then I've got a third question, but
okay,
you can either address those two now or wait till later.
So the first one was, can I put in additional services? Essentially, was that the question there?
Correct. So if there is an additional service that you're offering, let's say backup, can you assign cost to that backup and then have that be reflected in the ITBM stuff?
So I'm pretty sure that this iteration of it is more focused on that infrastructure as a service component. I'm sure if you went with the advanced version or the enterprise version, you can get that, but that doesn't integrate with vCAC. That's more of a separate beast in itself.
Okay, so it's not like a function of the advanced services designer or anything?
No, I don't believe so. And then so the next question was, is the main goal to basically make it so that they said about tagging the cost to a VM. Is the main goal to be able to get this to represent the VM so that when somebody goes to provision a VM, the costs that this figures out are associated with that VM? Is that the main goal? And if it is,
sure. Yeah.
if it is, that's the whole point of this with this version. So in vCAC, in previous versions, there's a thing called a cost profile that you have to go in and you have to manually populate, right? And it says, my memory, CPU, and storage per gig cost X, right? When you're using ITBM standard with this solution, it can pre-populate that information for you so that you don't have to go out and manually create those cost profiles yourself. And then you can also go in and edit that information if it's not exactly where you want it to be. That make sense?
Yeah, it is. And I'm checking with Suresh, who asked that question, if that addresses the question. And then another question is, do I need chargeback if I get ITBM?
Well, so that right there that's an interesting question. Okay. So
and I'm assuming it means chargeback from a product perspective and not chargeback.
Yeah, I think he's talking about vCenter. Yeah, he's talking about vCenter chargeback. So chargeback is going to allow you to get more granular. If you notice, like chargeback, you can go in and you can set up, you can go down to, I think, virtual, like you can have it connected to your, VCNS and have costs around virtual, edges and firewalls, and you can get a lot more granular. You can have that metered service type of thing. You can pull reports specific to those things, and do more of a chargeback type model. So it really boils down to the customer's use case. You know what I mean? If they're just trying to get some basic show back and get, and I'm granted, I'm just talking to ITBM standard, because advanced and enterprise, it's a whole nother beast, and it'll tie into your financial systems, and you can do a lot more there. You know what I mean? But from a ITBM standard standpoint, really it's geared towards being able to kind of fill that gap between the fact that, you know, you have chargeback, and there's a lot of work that has to go into chargeback to get all those costs inputted in and to set things up, right? And then you've got the other user, you know, so there's some people that need that, right? Like granularity, to a customer that maybe is just looking for something so that they can get some basic show back. They can go in here and say, if I provision, you know, this many VMs with this, it's going to cost me about this. Be able to compare costs between keeping it in their private cloud and public cloud. You know what I mean? So it's somewhat of a different use case. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Trying to frame that? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be the answer to that.
Okay. So Suresh's question, you know, the reason why it was asked is because vCenter Chargeback provides reports based on VM tags. And so the question was whether or not ITBM can do it. And if I haven't forgotten the last 3 minutes of my life, you said that either it didn't or you weren't sure. Is that right, John?
So specifically, they wanted, the goal is to know the cost of a specific VM.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, okay. So.
Or, you know, reports based on VM tags. You know, so if you have them all tagged, you know, say this is your Denver VMs or whatever, can you report based on those
you can put them in, I believe you can put them into groups, and you can get costs based on that. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have that ability, but you're not going to have quite the granularity that you're going to have with chargeback. I mean, that's what it boils down to. This is more. This was to fill in a gap that was there, really. You know, because, you know, if you looked at 5.2, there was some gaps in you know, if you wanted to do cost profiles and you wanted to assign costs to things, you had to kind of go and figure out those specific things and input them in and things like that, right? This is kind of filling that gap. It's also just kind of trying to give customers a tool where they can analyze really what things are costing them, you know, and what it would compare in other cloud service providers and things of that sort, you know.
Yep. Yeah. And then I've got another question.
Questions are good.
Yeah, I was teasing you on Twitter. If you don't have that up, well, you probably don't since you're on your laptop. But the identity source for vCloud or for the ITBM appliance, does that use the identity appliance for vCAC, or does that tie back to the vCenter one? I'm guessing it uses vCAC.
Well, basically, here's the deal. It's wherever you set your default tenant, right? So with vCAC, you can either use the identity appliance, and now after 5.5.0b, I guess there was a patch. After that, you can actually use if you have your SSO up to that version, you can use the one from vCenter, right? So it really depends on.
For vCAC, you can.
Yeah, you can. You can actually use the. You don't have to use the identity appliance as long as you're up to the right patch level. So it really depends on what SSO appliance you're using. If you're using the SSO appliance, or do you already have an SSO out there that's been upgraded to the appropriate version?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then I guess I need to do some upgrades in my lab. Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now I will tell you there is a little bit of a caveat there.
You have to stand on your head while you do it?
There's no real easy way to switch it if you already have it up.
Oh, okay. So if you already have it up and you've got it,
there's
done a whole lot of work in one. You can't really easily switch it, right?
Yeah, there's some internal stuff going around, and there's a little bit of a caveat and an issue there where there's no real easy way to, if you started with the identity appliance, to switch over to your vCenter SSO. So there's a caveat there. But if it's a net new install and you've got 5.5b, you're probably better to just go ahead and hook it to your existing SSO and run with it.
That's interesting.
Yes.
And now my brain's thinking out about how the database is designed, like if it's all based on UUID nonsense, right?
Yes.
All right. I will stop derailing you and taking on you, John.
No, that's fine. That is fine. I mean, basically, you can go in here and you could do an operational analysis. I mean, these are all pretty basic tabs. There's not a ton of like custom things you can do with this. So it's really meant for just kind of to give you a base look at costs. You know what I mean? And kind of pull that into some different reports and be able to figure out, what's your operational analysis, what's the demand analysis, like on average, what's the demand, for a specific cluster, and to be able to go and do, the cloud comparison thing, and then you can go in here and do reports, you can go in here and say OS licensing, and select different options, and it'll give you information on those specific topics and their costs. So there's not a whole lot going on there. There is some value, but if you're seeking more granularity, you're probably wanting to go with one of the enterprise or advanced versions, or like a chargeback type of deal.
Okay.
So I just kind of wanted to show that.
Your question, Steve's question was, does ITBM get down to a department or a section level of costs? And based on what you just said, John, I would say the answer is no, not with this version of ITBM, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I mean, you can go and you could go to what is this cloud comparison, and you can kind of go in here and say, I'm going to use current VMs, and I want to create a group, and you can group VMs and put them together, you know what I mean, and kind of get an idea of what that costs, but it's not quite there, you know what I mean? So you're going to want to look at some other solutions if you're looking for more granularity. Now, so do we got any more questions around that? Because I know that was kind of brief, but I mean, I just kind of wanted to show what that, what you had available there to integrate into vCAC from the business management piece. Do we got any other questions going on around that? That was about to shift gears.
No other questions within the webinar. Let me check the Twitters here real quick. Nope. We're good, man.
Okay, cool. So now I'm going to shift gears and we're going to talk about the Advanced Services Designer. Okay? So Advanced Services Designer, we're going to pop over here. So obviously, so everybody knows, so there's, when you deploy vCAC as the appliance, there's a built-in orchestrator, and then you can also put it in an external one. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. And this is different than going and setting up a so if you're going and you're doing like stub workflows, for instance, right? So there in vCAC, there's this thing where you can go in and there's these stubs like, at the stub of machine provisioned, I want to run this workflow and maybe trigger a VCO workflow, right? You can set up vCAC as an endpoint, right? Here under infrastructure, just like you go in here and set up any other endpoints, and you can create a VCO endpoint, and that's for like stub workflows and things like that, and that's part of the legacy infrastructure as a service component, right? And then there's this thing called the Advanced Services Designer, and what Advanced Services Designer is it basically allows you to go and put a GUI front end on an orchestrator, and for instance, like, so say there was I think there is like a NetApp plugin, right, for vCAC, or I think there's a Viper one too, right, and you wanted to go, and that plugin has workflows in it to maybe set up volumes or to do X, Y, Z on that array. You could go and you could use those plugins to create almost like a web form that a user can consume to do those services. So you can take VCO workflows and turn them into services within VCAC. And then you can also take any of those workflows, and if they're tied to the right type of resource, like for instance, the Microsoft plugin for Active Directory, it knows what a user account resource is, right? I could go and I can create what they call day 2 operations, and I can say, and I'm going to go and walk through this in a second. I'm just kind of trying to give some frame around it. Maybe I want to create Active Directory users as a service, and I want to be able to go and have a service out there that customers can go and click, and they can add a user and put it in a specific OU. I can enable that as a service where somebody walks through a form, they fill in the information, they click OK, and it in the background provisions that resource in the Active Directory, and then I can even create a day 2 operation if it's linked to a resource and say, okay, so now there's also a VCO workflow that says disable the account or enable the account or delete it or move it to another OU. And I can trigger those and make those as options off of that resource and be able to execute those in the same manner. So in VCAC, the way you set up the Advanced Services Designer is there's a couple of things. We definitely have to go back to administration, and if it's a user that's logged, so there's a couple of different levels of access or roles that give you access to the being able to do the advanced services. If you're a tenant administrator, you have the ability to do that, or a service architect. So I'm actually logged in here with an account that's kind of, it's a tenant administrator, and I've given it business management administrator, so it kind of has access to the whole gamut. But you could have a group here that was just service architects, and they have the ability to go in and maybe set up these advanced services. So that's one of the things you got to have in place. The other thing is if you go to advanced services here under administration, you basically, you can, so whatever endpoint you're using for VCO, whether it's here, you've let this load. Hold on, services. Oh, here. Whether you basically have it set to use the default orchestrator service or use an external orchestrator server, you have to have that set. So you got to decide where that's going to be. You have the ability to go in here and import workflows. So maybe you had a workflow that you created that you wanted to import and make available via the VCO, whatever VCO you're using, because maybe you're using the internal one that came with the appliance. And then you have this endpoints piece. And what this does is this allows you to basically go in and make the plugins available. So I'm going to go endpoints here, and I'm going to say I'm going to make sure that I can use the Active Directory plugin. I'm going to hit next. I'm just going to call this AD. Next. And then you basically got to give it the information about Active Directory. So give me a second here. Probably should have been a little more prepared with this piece, but I have actually been in a training this whole week out here in Palo Alto, and I actually left it a couple minutes early to hop on here with you guys. So you basically put that in. You need to put a base search path in LDAP. So I'm actually just going to go DN. I think it's or default domain. Oh, maybe it is DC. I always go and I copy it out of ASDI edit.
Dude, tell me about it.
I'm a little lazy with that, so you
I
might
don't use ADSI edit. What I do is I'll just go into the users and computers role, and I'll just enable the advanced features in the view, and it's got an attribute editor that pops up where you can call out the distinguished name and all kinds of fancy stuff.
Yeah.
Bam! And every time I have to look, because for whatever reason, LDAP strings, I cannot add praying about that one. I don't know what the deal is.
I got you, and I used to do a lot with them, but now I've gotten lazy. I just pop in and grab them. So basically, you just got to define, the search base path. So it's just doing a bind, and it needs to know where it's going to start its search. If you're using SSL or not, give it the default domain, and then you got to give it an account to use, right? So I'm just going to use this account. Obviously, since it's just basically doing a bind and a search, you've got to give it an account that can do whatever operation you're wanting this thing to do. And so I'm going in here, I'm doing that. I'm going to hit add. Hopefully I typed in everything correctly. It's going to go through, it's going to create this. Okay, apparently I did something wrong. It's always great doing these things on the fly here. Let me validate this. I just want to make sure.
Let this be a lesson to you, boys and girls. RTFM.
DC, yes, so it is DC. People Corp, DC local. So there's my LDAP string or pat.
You got to use an FBN or anything on the username?
Oh, you know what? I wonder if I actually got to do. Maybe that's it. Let me add this. That's a valid point. Okay. It failed the connection, so it's actually acting like it's Active Directory server. I don't think I need this, but I'll validate. Of course, I'm here on the phone doing a live demo and stumbling.
Your domain name is mycompany.com. Type at mycompany.com for your default domain.
I can try that. I know that there's... Oh, you mean you're talking here?
Yeah, yeah. So do @corplocal in the default domain box.
I can give that a try. I don't know that. Yeah, this is bad.
Because they're probably being lazy and doing the SPN that way.
Oh,
Bam.
go figure.
Document.
Go Damien. Go Damien. Way to back me up there, buddy.
And that's what you get when you have programmers who get off work at 4 in the afternoon in California and go surf. I'm just kidding.
That's what I get for trying to do this live. I had forgot that I even removed that connection, and I was like, oh, I got to configure that.
So Stacy Carter has a question, and it is, can you use an external vCenter orchestrator appliance if you only have vCloud Automation Center standard?
Can you? Okay, so here's the deal. For the Advanced Services Designer, no. Because you need at least advanced in order to use the Advanced Services Designer. So I hope that answers that question.
You need advanced. Are you talking about?
You need VCAC advanced in order to get the Advanced Services Designer. So it's not included with VCAC standard.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So you need advanced or enterprise version of it. So there you go. Okay, so I've got that connected. I've got my configuration. For now, I'm only going to do the AD endpoint there. And so now, once you've got that set up, you would jump over here to what the Advanced Services section here. And so what we're going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is, so they've got this thing called Custom Resources, right? So what ends up happening is there's two ways I can kick off these workflows. I could kick off a workflow and make it so that it just runs, but it doesn't track that as an object, like so. But if it's something like an Active Directory user and I want to be able to track it and I want to be able to tie a day 2 operation to it, I'm going to create a custom resource, right? So what I'm going to do here is, in this example, I'm actually going to just use an Active Directory. So I'm going to go AD user here, and that's what I'm going to use as the example, and I'm just going to call it AD user here. I'm going to hit next. I'm just going to kind of take the default on the form here, and I'm going to hit add. And so what that's done is now I have this resource that I can tie to the workflow so that when it creates an object, it binds this resource to it so that I can do operations on it. And then what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go through and I'm actually going to create a service with that resource. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to go to Orchestrator. And as you can see, if you're at all familiar with VCO, this is the same drop-down that you're going to get when you're actually in the VCO client and you're actually going through and browsing for workflows from the client. So I'm just going to go down here. I'm going to go to Microsoft because and the built-in one already has stuff like the Microsoft plugin, the PowerShell plugin, and things already built into it. So traditionally, some of those things you'd have to go and you'd have to pull the plugin down and add it. Those things are all built into the built-in VCO that comes with the appliance. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to Microsoft. I'm going to go to Active Directory. I'm going to go to User. And for instance, in this example, I'm going to say I'm going to create a user with a password and an organizational unit. That's what I'm going to do for this workflow. So now I'm going to go. I'm going to hit next. You can kind of edit this stuff if you want it to be presented in a different manner to your customer. Hit next. And then basically what it ends up doing is it goes through and tells you this is all the information I need to create this account, right? And so you can also go in here and, for instance, maybe you want this to be more user-friendly names. So I'm going to organizational unit, and you can go and change all these, make them look pretty, change the way they look. And this one actually already has a change password at next login built into it. And I'm not going to change all these right now just for the sake of not wanting to go and click through all of them right now. And then I'm going to hit next. And then what it says is provisioned resource. And since I created this custom resource, now I can actually go and select that option. And it's basically saying, here's the resource type, and it's mapped to this resource in Orchestrator. So it's basically making it so that there's this resource that you've defined in VCAC, and it's tied to a resource that's already defined in Orchestrator so that they kind of know about each other. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit add. And so now that I've actually got that in there, what I can do is I can do to this just like I can any other service. So if you remember when we created blueprints for infrastructure as a service, you had to go and publish that blueprint, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I am going to publish this blueprint just like I would a regular infrastructure as a service blueprint. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to administration, and I'm going to do entitlements. We talked about entitlements last time, but basically now you've got to create an entitlement. Now, as you can see, I was already dorking around in here, so I actually already have an entitlement set up for AD as a service. And if I go into this entitlement, it's going to basically say I have this AD as a service item, which is basically just a logical container. If I wanted to actually just give specific items out of the catalog, I could select them too. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my catalog items, and I've actually got this create a user, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and bind it to that service so that it gets that entitlement. So I'm going to go here to service, I'm going to select my AD as a service, I'm going to hit update. And now what's going to happen is, now granted I'm logged in with the user that has access to the catalog and everything. If this was an end user, they wouldn't have all these tabs. But now when they click on their catalog, what they're going to get is they're actually going to get this, have this AD as a service, and it says create a user. And so what ends up happening is now you can present this as a service to your user. I can go and I can click give it a just give it a name here. Great thing here is I can just start typing, and it's aware. Basically, it's just doing a search. It's it's going through and walking AD. So I can start typing the OU name, and it's going to populate a list. I give it the OU name. I'm just going to call this, I don't know, we're just going to call it Bob. I'm going to call it Bob. And then password, I'm going to give Bob a password.
Did you end up putting in the text that's on this page?
End up putting in what now?
The text. Sorry, I was looking at Twitter and dealing with those rabble rousers. The text that's on this page, like the choose OU stuff. Where did that come from? Did you just pre-populate that from somewhere?
You mean these? You mean these here?
Yeah.
The names?
The help text above it, yes.
Okay, so what it's doing is when I go and I connect it to a workflow, it knows about all the inputs it needs, right? And so it's already populating these in the form, right? And it has these names. If you notice, just like the org unit, or this was OU path or something, right? I just went and renamed this. So you can rename all these names to something that's more relevant to your user that looks better. I only did the top one there. But it's already it already pre-populates all the fields it needs to add the user, or to create that user with that service. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So then I can just go, core local here. Bob's name is going to be Bob. I have this option to say change the password at next login. I go and I hit submit. Hit OK. Go to test here. And okay.
I saw Bob in there.
I did see Bob too. What happened to Bob? Hold on here. This is what happens when you have it all up and working. Let's go to request, and then you take it all down before you go and present. Oh, so I actually had an error. That's nice. Let me try this again.
You set up with that, do they have the ability to create new users?
You mean the one where I set the endpoint up? Yeah, it was the domain admin. So you're talking over here to endpoint.
Right. Yeah.
Configuration. Yeah, the account I used in here. Let me just validate. Yeah, so the account I actually had in here was. I got to break something by updating it. Let's see. Okay, so there we go. So I got that. Let me go back here and just make sure that that wasn't just some fluke. Cancel here. Test. Local. Apparently you got to select it. Hit submit. Okay, this thing's making a liar out of me. I don't like it. What do we got here?
Steve, I see your question in here.
Go ahead and ask. Yeah, go ahead and ask the question.
Steve? So Rodney Vargas is saying that the domain name should be bob@corp.local.
You know what? I think he's right. I am ill-prepared today. This is what happens. This is what happens
One
when
of the
you're
more
in training all
frustrating
day.
things about working with technology is if you've ever had a experience with like database input sanitization or UI creation or anything like that, when you come up against something that isn't very obvious as to what you should put in, that sort of thing always kind of makes me upset.
So he's saying the account name should be bob@corp.local. I want to give that a try. I don't know that that's the case, but we'll give it a try.
So Steve, I believe you're making a statement rather than asking, but he says that you need at least VCAC Advanced or Enterprise Designer in order to use an external vCenter orchestrator server. So that answers that question.
Well, and you need it. You need Advanced or Enterprise to even be able to do Advanced Services Designer. Period. So to be able to use VCO to create services and yeah. I inherently have broken something here, but I'm going to show you a different example. Because I've got examples coming out my rear here. So anyways.
Something I'd like to brag about, but okay.
Yeah. Here's another example. So the other thing that I wanted to highlight here is you can create an actual service, and you can also do what they call resource actions, right? So for instance, I'm just going to create a resource action. Let's see here. Let's just say that for some odd reason, I want to go in here and I want to create a resource action that says upgrade VM tools. All right? I'm going to tie that to the resource type that's already here. Upgrade tools. Next. There's a field here. It's kind of an optional field that basically says, are there any additional installer options you want? That's the default field. I'm going to hit add here. I'm going to take this. I am going to publish it. Same deal. You got to go in and you got to entitle it. So you'd go back to catalog management, entitlements. We're going to go to the infrastructure service entitlements, item approvals. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to entitlement actions. And I am going to just search on tools. And upgrade tools. Click OK. Update. Go to, speaking of, do I actually have an item provisioned? If not, I guess we're, give me a second. Let's provision a Windows box. What the heck? Wow. This is what happens when you were messing with your lab.
or my home lab that thankfully, due to an anonymous benefactor, I no longer have to use, my VMs would have, like driven off the side of the road and like crashed into a ravine or something. Because, oh my gosh, yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, so I inherently broke some stuff. I was having some issues. There is one issue that I will tell you around the Advanced Services Designer, and apparently I have broken it real good here. So there is one, and I'd love to come back and actually, hold on. I got another idea. Give me a second.
We could just spin it and say that, for the purposes of this demo, we decided to make an advanced service, the inability to design an advanced service. So there we go. It's failure as a service.
Oh, failure as a service, yeah. This is what happens when you're using the same environment to test things as you are using to present. Oh, you know what, sorry. Too many passwords, too many different places. I'm going to pop into another environment. I got environments everywhere.
So while John is bragging about his virtual host and different area codes, does anyone have any questions or comments or a funny knock-knock joke or some such?
Here we go. I'm going to log into this thing here.
No.
Nothing, huh?
No, I was laughing at hitting continue 3 times. You shall not pass.
Oh, you know what? Hold on. Yeah, too many environments. CC admin.
That use Windows session authentication sure is handy when you're actually, jumping in through a box that's on that same domain.
Yeah.
Because, well, this certainly would be cool if I didn't have to remember 4 different domains.
Okay.
Stacey Carter has a question.
I'm failing miserably here. Go for it.
Stacey wants to know if you or if anyone else knows if you can delete a catalog item or rename one.
So, okay, so if you've got a catalog item, so are you talking so an actual item you provisioned or an actual item in the catalog? I'm just trying to get here. Is this a...
She has an actual catalog.
Okay, so she wants to go in and she wants to delete a blueprint? Or remove a blueprint from the catalog? Is that what we're getting at here, Stacy?
Stacy, I can unmute you if it works.
I just want to...
She says know where you have services, catalogs, and entitlements. So
So catalog management, services, entitlements.
Are we driving in the right place here, Stacy?
I really want to answer her question.
She would like to be unmuted. I don't recall if you've spoken on the podcast before, Stacy. So awesome. First-time caller, long-time listener. Let me find her here. Hey, Stacy, what's up?
Hey, Damien, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you for unmuting me. So yeah, I'm a newbie, but when you go up to catalog items, right there, John.
Catalog items, okay.
And it's where you have like the 3 columns where you have it's where you can go to services and then you go to like change or something. Okay, go to services maybe.
Go to services,
yeah.
okay.
Hold on, let me move my window here. 1 second. and click on Actions next to one of the services. And manage catalog items.
Okay.
Okay, I want to delete one of those, or actually want to rename them. And I have not, I can, yeah, see, I don't have.
So there's a remove option.
Yeah, I don't have that option for some reason. But I do have standard, so perhaps that's why.
Okay. I wonder, because standard doesn't have the entitlements piece, right? If I'm correct.
I can see entitlements, but I don't know that I can necessarily do anything with them. It's like sometimes the options are there, but I can't configure them. And for some reason, I can add a catalog item, but I can't change the name or remove them. So it looks like you have more options than I do.
Okay, so if you had a catalog item, if you just go into the catalog item, and so you want to rename it.
At the top there, you know, the name create a user with.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure on that. That's a very valid question, and I'm not really sure the answer. I know how to definitely remove it from the service. I mean, that's just going into the item and removing it from the service.
Yeah, I removed it from the service, but then it just hangs out in the catalog, and I'm like, well, I want to clean up and just completely blow it away from vCAC, and I can't.
Oh, you know what? Hold on. So those catalog items, right, are published. So I bet you, if you were to go over to, hold on, so catalog item. So are they just infrastructure items?
Yeah.
Right, they're just blueprints. I bet you if you just go over to blueprints, and you take that blueprint and you, hold on, is there a way to, and you delete it, yeah, that would definitely remove it from the catalog.
Oh, I don't want to do that. I just.
No, I got you. I'm just trying to give you options here.
I mean, I want to keep the blueprint, but I don't like when I published the catalog item. I was like, oh, I messed up the name, and I just want to change the name. But it's you know, I can figure it out.
Hold on a second. I've got another idea. I'm full of ideas.
It was showing there in the red star. And Stacy, while we're on the topic, have you renewed your service and support agreement with VMware?
It's so much easier to just ask John.
That's how you do it.
I do the same thing. I do the same thing. I'm like,
yeah.
That's how you do it. Go into the blueprint and change the name of the blueprint. All I did was go into infrastructure here. I went into my blueprint. I changed the name of the blueprint. I hit OK. And now when I go back over to administration and catalog management, it changes it here too.
Okay, I'll try that out.
So change the name on the blueprint, and it's going to reflect on the item in the catalog, because these are just objects that are assigned to those blueprints. So if you change it in the blueprint, it changes here.
All right. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And thanks, Troy. All right, Stacy, I put you back on mute. If you'd like to be unmuted, just let me know. Or if anybody else would like to speak on the podcast, just let me know. Come on, guys. It's only distributed globally, and it's on the record forever.
You mean my epic fail tonight? Let's see here. The other thing that I was the only other thing that I was trying to show here is, and I'm going to show it even though that the provisioning is broken, which I'm not going to try to fix on the fly here while I'm on the phone, is the fact that I could go and I could take, say, this destroy user, and I can create a custom resource action, right? And I can add that. And now what ends up happening is when I go to that catalog item, well, never mind. I don't have one provisioned. If I had one provisioned, what you end up with is day 2 operations on that specific item. And so there, like if there were an AD user account that was provisioning here, I'd be able to go over to the right of it, just like this, a machine here. And when I click on this button, actions, that action would be there. There would be an action to delete that account, you know, or enable it or disable it and things of that sort. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a service, but it can also be a day 2 operation. Make sense?
Cool. Yeah. Steve wanted to point out, you know, first it's really great that he's able to see a demo like this because he hasn't really had an opportunity to see the product in person. And then second, he said that you had started out saying you were aware of one issue with the product, and you didn't finish the sentence.
Oh, yep. So I will make you aware. There is a little bit of an issue where you just got to be careful that if, like, say you're doing AD user accounts as a service, right? And if you're doing that as a service, if somebody were to go and delete that account out of the Active Directory and not use the tool, it doesn't necessarily sync up, and you'll end up with this like a stale object there. You know what I mean? So you just got to be real careful around the operational piece around it. You know what I mean? If you're going to use this tool to do it, you need to make sure that people aren't in the background just deleting stuff straight from AD. Interestingly enough, is when you do have an object in there, right? You can do the day 2 operation, so you could have the delete count there, and everything syncs up. It's just like if you were to hop into Active Directory in the background and delete it, it doesn't make vCAC aware of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So that reminds me of with vCloud Director, if you have VMs that are underneath vCloud Director management and you delete them using vCenter, vCloud Director doesn't know because, you know, for whatever reason.
Yeah, so it's the same type of scenario. You just need to be careful around that. You know what I mean? Because it could cause some problems. And ultimately, that's what broke my lab. Is I was
so I wonder if you could put something in there that would write an extra attribute, like let's say into the description that says, you know, created by vCAC, don't delete, that sort of a thing, right?
Yeah, you probably could definitely do something like that, so that and then that way, you know, you wouldn't have a problem there.
But maybe not necessarily. That reminds me of Pinocchio from Shrek. It's like one of my favorite scenes of all time. I cannot necessarily say maybe yes or no. Gotcha.
And so you want to be careful. I mean, I'll give you basically what I ran into is, so I went through and I had ADs. I was using this environment I was using for demos just last week. I was doing demos, showing people AD as a service, and I'm like, I'm going to do OUs as a service, right? And so I had it set up where you could create Active Directory OUs on the fly, same type of deal. You know, go run through the wizard and creates it, right? And I created an OU, and then I created a couple that were nested in it, right? And so then I went through and I decided, okay, now I'm going to delete the top level OU, right? With this option that I created as a day 2 operation that said delete this OU and the child OUs, right? And so it went through and it deleted them out of Active Directory. It deleted the root resource object, but then those nested objects that were there, like the OUs that the resource objects in vCAC for the OUs that were nested didn't go out of vCAC. So I went and I scrambled and I just kind of removed the whole services designer, and it pulled out those stale objects. But I've had a couple of issues here. So you just have to be careful. It'll let you do anything and everything you want it to do, but you just got to be careful on those that resource and vCAC to resource and Active Directory relationship, you know, and make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to cause you a problem there. I mean, that's the big thing. So lesson learned.
So depending on your domain functional level, I would imagine you could probably just undelete them or take them out of the recycle bin or substitute them stone flag or whatever the deal. The current cool kids are saying about that, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. Like if you were running at 2008 and you had the recycle bin or or if you wanted to be all crazy and go and use some of the old tombstoning stuff or whatever it is, you absolutely could retrieve it that way, or if you had a tool. But you just, I'm just talking from the operational standpoint here. You just got to be a little. It's a great tool, and there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. You just have to be careful about those dependencies. That's the big thing.
Right.
And just make sure that it's, you're not putting yourself in a bad scenario there.
Steve has a question if you could force a sync to fix that issue.
Say it again?
Or if it's just, Steve's question was if you could force a sync to fix the issue. Like if you could force it to sync the data back from AD.
Okay, so
let's just say no, don't do it, don't ask why.
I am unaware, personally myself, of a way to do it. So I'm sorry, I don't know the exact answer to that. But is this Steve Complain? Is that the dude who's throwing out all these questions?
No, it's Steve Epsilon.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Do you think it was a coworker giving you the business?
No, there's a dude named Steve Complain that I'm actually seeing here on the Twitter, and that dude's actually got he's doing a quite large environment. That dude knows his stuff.
Gotcha.
So I actually see him putting some comments out here on the Twitter, so I was wondering if that was the Steve that was asking that question.
What's his handle?
His handle is STVKPIN. Actually, you know what? And I'm sorry, he wasn't listening.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's not tagging it as vBrownBag, so I see him throwing some stuff out there.
Anywhere. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, he's put some stuff out here. It says, in my humble opinion, it depends on how the OU designation happens, and that's a whole totally different subject. Sorry, I'm not with it. So, anyways,
he's not right in the head, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm not right in the head tonight. So, regardless of the fact, it really is an awesome tool. I would suggest that if you have the opportunity to get in there and start looking at some of the different use cases, because it doesn't necessarily have to be AD users as a service. It can be just those day two operations. Maybe there's some specific machine operation that you want to be able to do. Maybe you want to make it so that certain people can run snapshots or delete them, or maybe you want to make it so that somebody can do the VM tool updates. Basically, anything that you can go in and you can run as a workflow in there, and you can tie it to a resource object, you can run as a day two operation. So it's really kind of up to your creativity. There's a guy named Aaron Swimmer that works here, and I was at a training recently, and he had one where it was prank call as a service, and he had found this service that had a REST API out there that he could connect to, and it did a text-to-voice phone call type of deal. So you'd go and you'd type in the text, it would call the phone number, it would take the text, turn it into voice, and call the number. And he did that as a demo at a customer. He had it set up and had a VCO workflow through the Advanced Services Designer, where it would just ask for the phone number, what you wanted to do there, and it would connect to the REST API and run.
Awesome.
So that's just an example of the type of thing you can do with it. So it's really up to your creativity and what you'd like to do with it.
Absolutely. Could you give it a little bit of an explanation of what you mean by day two operations?
Sure. So what I'm talking about day two operations is basically operations on a resource that's already been provisioned. You've already done the initial provision that's out there, and maybe there's additional tasks that you want to be able to do on it. So for VM, it could be things like, I want to add an additional hard drive. I want to re-provision it. I want to reclaim the resource. I want to install tools. So it's operations that are going to happen after that initial provisioning of the resource. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about on those day 2 operations. So like if you notice, like entitlements in here, there's already like a bunch of built-in operations. If I go to catalog management entitlements, and I go into one of these entitlements, what you'll notice is under items approvals, there's these entity actions, right? And there's already these built-in ones, cancel, reconfigure, change lease, connect to virtual desktop. Just actions that you want to be able to perform on that resource after it's initially provisioned. And so if there's something there in VCO or something that you even want to build to make it so that you can manipulate that resource in a specific way after it's provisioned, you can turn that into an action that you can tie to that resource and make it available via entitlements. So it doesn't have to be these pre-canned actions. You can tie those to VCO workflows that you create or that are built in there to be able to extend the capabilities that you give off to your end users.
And is there an ability to add in a multi-level approval process? So, for example, I submit it, my supervisor, approves it, and then the manager needs to approve?
So, I mean, that's the same deal as the regular approval. So you can go in and you can do approval policies.
Oh yeah, with your approval groups.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's the same type of deal. You're just telling it what type of item you're doing it on. So say it's a virtual machine, and then you can go in and go to pre-approval, and you can specify specific users and groups or determine the approvers and determine if everybody has to approve it or specific people have to approve it,
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go into here and you can do conditions. This is really cool in 6. You were kind of limited in previous versions, so you can say all of the following, and you could say, if the cost is equals or is greater than, and give it a value, and then you can add an additional expression, and you can tell that all together, or it could be any of the following, or none of the following. So you can do these and, almost like and if or statements in there.
Right.
And then you can make it, you can even go further in there and make it so that the approver can go in and edit specific items, And so you can say the approver has the ability to edit these items before they approve it. So a lot of flexibility there.
That's awesome.
The one other thing that you can't do with the yet, and they're looking at, well, you can't do yet, is the whole life cycle management piece. So in vCAC you can set leases and stuff. You can't necessarily apply that to services that are created through the Advanced Services Designer today. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you can't put a lease on 80 users as a service yet,
Oh, I gotcha. So like the temp employee or something like that, or a contractor.
Yeah, you don't have the ability to do that today. That's one area where it's just a little lacking at this day and time. But you can still apply approvals.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. But you can still do approvals and entitlements and everything else that you can do to infrastructure as a service components.
So Troy had a couple questions. First, his question is, what about building a workflow for when a service fails? You know, for example, can you monitor a service that's inside a VM? Can you monitor its running state and then either reset or restart, etc.? That's more of an orchestrator question versus a vCAC question.
That very much that very much is, and I would say that something like that. So you want to be able to monitor a service, and then you want to know if that service goes down, restart it. That sounds more like, to me, like a VCO. There's a VCO plugin for vCenter operations, and I think there's also one for Hyperic, because Hyperic, that's another one of our solutions that's part of the vCenter operations suite, allows you to do application level and OS level monitoring. And so you might be able to trigger something from there saying, hey, you know, if I see this service go down, an alert via the Hyperic agent, restart it, you know?
And there's also plugins for SSH. There's, you know, any number of HTTP plugins. There's PowerShell, and there's SNMP. So you can actually consume sources of data and then bring those into Orchestrator and then do things based on the data that's coming in.
Absolutely. So there's a ton of different ways to get to that result.
Yeah. A vCenter Orchestrator is very cool. My own personal experience takes a bit to wrap your head around it because there's a, you know, due to the nature of its ability to do a lot, it can be pretty confusing.
It can be a little overwhelming at first getting into it, and that's one kind of cool thing about this advanced services designer, right? Is if you do have vCAC, it's allowing you with very little buy-in to be able to start exploiting the powers of VCO, you know?
Right.
That's kind of one of the cool plays on it, you know?
So Steve, would vCenter Orchestrator be a better solution than System Center Orchestrator? That's a good question. There's pros and cons to both. You know, I'm sure that's kind of the discussion that people would want to like start, you know, picking up torches and pitchforks about. There's pros and cons to both. There's interoperability, you know, between the two of them, but ultimately it really kind of depends on what you want to do. So, for example, System Center Orchestrator, you can actually control vSphere entities, but you can't do as much as if you had a VMware piece of management software in front of it, if that makes sense. Let's see. And then Troy has a question, John. I'm going to let you take a swing at this because I don't know, and I think you're a little bit closer to the sales cycle that you would. What's the licensing on vCAC 6? Okay,
so that I can talk about. I got no problems talking about it. So there are 3 versions of vCAC. There's an standard, advanced, and enterprise. The standard and then there's 2 different licensing models. There's one licensing model which is basically like a per OSI model, so a per operating system model, and then there's the vCloud suite licensing. And that's per socket. So what you can do is standard is only a part of the suite. So if you want standard, you have to go with the vCloud suite standard. And then advanced or enterprise can either be bought, you know, per socket as part of the suite, or they can be purchased, the individual per OSI model. And that's how you consume it from a licensing standpoint.
Cool. I hope that made sense, Troy.
I hope it did too.
That probably didn't sound right. John is fantastic. I hope that answered your question. Not like, man, it's getting late here. Ronald would like to know, how is the reporting for vCAC? How granular can you get with it?
Okay, so reporting-wise, things are going to get a little real here. So version 5.2 had a lot more built-in reporting. as far as the reporting standpoint, basically what we have, today is there's these portlets that you can add in. They're kind of pre-canned portlets, and you can put them on this beginning dashboard, infrastructures and capacity usage by owner, by compute resource blueprint, by business group. So if you're at all familiar with 5.2, there was actually a reporting website that you could go to, and you could get a little more granular. Not all of that functionality made it into this version, but this is the type of reporting you can get today. Is these canned reports, and you can add them as portlets to the different so when somebody logs in, they basically have a dashboard with information around their objects, or as an administrator around groups of objects. And that's kind of what I got to say there.
All I got to say about that.
Yeah.
Venkata has a question that might, may or may not strike a nerve. Do you have any news that you can share about the plans for upgrade compatibility between 5.2 to 6?
Okay. Being an employee, there's all I can point you to is, and I'll dig up the KB, but there's a KB out there that says that there are plans to having that upgrade path out later this year. It's about the most I can give you there. There are plans on having that available. Wish I had more for you, but that's about all I can comment there on. So you're basically being able to upgrade from 5.2 to 6 is the question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's on the roadmap, but I can't talk to any specific dates or anything of that sort.
Makes sense. Steve, his question is there a minimum requirement for a particular version of vCenter to make use of vCAC? Yes, there is, Steve. If you go out to the VMware product compatibility or interoperability matrix, you can actually take a look at the solution interoperability function of that page. And so for example, vCAC 6 works with randomly enough, a number of different combinations of vCenter 4.1, and then vCenter 5 from 5.0 U3 all the way up to current GA. So, that'll definitely, hopefully help there. And then his question is vCAC and ITBM. So I'm already out here already because I was answering that own question for myself and some work I was doing earlier. They only have the higher versions of the ITBM suite on this matrix right now. So the standard one is actually a different product from an interoperability and a version perspective. The standard is 1.0. The higher ones are like 7 and 8. And so there's nothing out there on the matrix for 7 and 8 with vCAC 6.
Yeah, basic. Yeah, I mean, the standard version was kind of built to work with vCAC, and it is a different product. It's in an appliance. Advanced Enterprise are much larger beasts with Oracle databases, and you can get a lot of really cool business information out of them, but there's no integration there right now.
Thanks. Troy has another question. I'm going to let you take a swing at it, John, because I've got a viewpoint on it. Well, I have a viewpoint on it as well, but I just want to get too far off topic. His question is: at what point would you consider selling or running vCAC in an environment? Would we be talking about like 3 to 5 vCenters, single domain, multi-domain, etc.? At what point would you say, wow, it's time for vCAC?
At what point would you say, wow, it's time for VCAC as a management kind of broker? Well, you know, my thoughts on it are it's more about business process. It's more about being able to automate services and things of that sort. So really that's what it boils down to, is when there almost has to be kind of a transformation internally in your IT department, that they want to start changing the way they offer services, and they want to align with these, you know, with a different type of model, you know. I believe that's kind of when you start looking at a solution like this. Or maybe you're also in a scenario where maybe you want to be able to put governance around things. I know I'm using the buzzword here, but I want to be able to make it so that there's an approval process, but I can automate that approval process and make it so that people can get their jobs done quicker, but the appropriate approvals are put in place. Those are definite good use cases for moving that direction.
Well, you did also use the T word, transformation, so go Federation. Corporate brother high five.
Yes, there you go.
My perspective on that, Troy, if you don't mind, John, is that VCAC isn't necessarily a business user-facing solution. You know, typically as you're starting to go through that operating model transformation, cliche buzzword process, and you start to work through the process of designing and developing a service catalog, many times folks have you know, a couple different views into that service catalog. One of them could be the IT-facing view, and the other one could be the business user-facing view. So you may not actually be at the place where you want to start offering infrastructure or platform as a service to your non-technical end users, but you still might want to be able to put some smarts and some orchestration into being able to deploy things to make your life easier as an IT person. So for example, you could go in and deploy a blueprint in vCAC and have some smarts built into Orchestrator that says, hey, I need to go talk to my storage front end and get the storage provisioned and slap that onto this VM, and you know, here you go, Troy. I just saved you some boring next, click, finish steps as part of your daily work. So I hope that answers the question.
You know, and I would absolutely agree with you there, Damien. I mean, a perfect example is even when I was working at UNM. Our ultimate goal was to get there, but sometimes you're not ready to start right off the bat showing that service to end users, you know, but it's taken out some legwork for your internal people. I mean, I've got customers right now that I'm talking to, and that's really what it is maybe, you know, they've got a bunch of developers and stuff, and they're having to spin stuff up real quick. Well, at minimum, even just from the get-go, being able to make it so that they can get that job done quicker, you know, and they're not being bogged down with those things.
Right, right. I actually did some work for a very large, globally recognized financial services company a while back, and some of their highest-paid people literally sat there and walked through like SQL install wizards. And, you know, with a little bit of I swear to gosh, you know, with a little bit of PowerShell or, you know, some command or batch files, you know, you can actually do unattended installs and streamline all that stuff in as you go. And, you know, being able to click a button and say, bam, here's SQL 2008, you know, with integration and reporting services built in. And I did that in as long as it takes to install all those things on SQL normally. Typically 20 to 30 minutes because it's slow. You know, here you go. I pressed a button and I got a shiny car at the very end. That was a revelation. And, you know, just kind of thinking to myself, I was like, man, I could not imagine going to work every single day and thinking, you know, time to click the button, right? It's, you know, at some point,
yeah,
you'd want to automate that just so you could start and then go get a cup of coffee or, you know, catch up on your
absolutely
because you just got your lives back or something like that, right? Ron's question, or Ronald actually, his question is, do you think vCAC could replace offshore folks' runbooks as an automated process? That's a really interesting question, Ronald. Sorry. John, what do you think about that?
Say that one again.
Do you think vCAC could replace runbooks that you might have in place for offshore people?
Well, I guess what it boils down to, I mean, you could, pretty much. The question is, would you want to? You could. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of this, advanced services piece, is that if you can automate it via orchestrator, yeah, probably can present it as a service. But that's a pretty complicated use case there, and there are definite tools out there that are made to deal with that without having to go through the footwork to make it happen through vCAC. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. I don't know about you, but this is this has kind of ran on long. This has been a really good show. Are there any other questions, concerns, comments like that 6-foot dad needs to stop laughing? Anything at all? Here we go. Steve, how much time should be put aside to implement vCloud Automation Center?
How much time should we put aside to implement vCAC?
Well, do you want to buy an accelerator or a jumpstart?
So, okay, vCAC. I mean, ultimately, it's not something you're just going to turn around and slap into your environment and go clicky clicky. And even, I mean, and there's, the thing of it is it takes, there's a lot of steps. That's what it boils down to. It's not necessarily that it's like a difficult installation. It's just there's a lot of things, and you got to know that process. Now, for me, like at this point, like we do BOCs. We aim for 4 hours, but that's a POC environment. That's not production. There's a lot more that has to happen there, and there's also things that have to happen around a business process stuff, and just discovering how you want to deliver those services and things to that sort to end users. You know what I mean? It's not even necessarily the technical aspects. It's like, okay, so who are the approvers? Right. And defining those things, and defining things around, okay, this is my standard build. How do I want to provision that? And really kind of walking through the whole process. It's really about defining the automation and defining your business processes and your technical processes. Like how I mean, at UNM, the big exercise we went through was, okay, we had a specific service, and our service was we host VMs for other entities on campus, right? And so what we had to do is step back and say, let's walk through the whole process from start to finish for provisioning that VM and identify everything. And sometimes it feels like a kind of a pain in the butt to go through that process. But if you don't actually narrow down the process and find out all the little pieces that happen along the way, what you're going to end up doing is saying, hey, yeah, the technical piece worked, and I stood this service up, but I forgot about X, Y, Z, and so I'm not really delivering a fully automated solution to my customer. So it's really probably about getting, those are the pieces that take much longer than standing up vCAC from a technical standpoint, in my opinion.
Right, right. So as part of my day job, I actually am responsible for a lot of EMC Global Services VMware-related offerings. And the infrastructure automation, the vCloud Automation Center related services that we have are initially scoped, and yours are much the same way, John. They're initially scoped around a handful of workloads. It involves, business case discovery, use case definition, a little bit of a lunch and learn to kind of understand the product, design, stand up, and then validation. And I believe that takes somewhere in the area of about 6 to 8 business days. And that's focused on dev and test, so you're not looking at something with a lot of high availability or you know, distributed components, or, you know, fancy things like bringing in and creating and customizing vCenter orchestrated workflows, et cetera. So, you know, just like John said, throwing the appliances together, that doesn't take too much time at all. You know, actually trying to figure out the best way to integrate that into your environment and to make it effective, really depends.
Yeah, so I hate to say it, but it's the depends thing. It's just like any other design.
Right, yeah.
And then there's a lot to it, even like you were talking about having a distributed system and making it highly available. Those are a lot of additional things that have it, you know, depending on the environment and what you're trying, the use case. I mean, there's a whole reference architecture guide out there now for 6 that goes through, and this is how you make this system highly available, you know, and things of that
Right.
sort. And that takes a good bit of extra effort.
Indeed. Indeed it does. You know, and then of course you start getting into the more difficult things of, you know, actually dealing with the nature of the business itself. You know, for example, are you financial services where you need to have ports poked in every single VLAN and, you know, have it mapped to, you know, to MAC addresses, and it doesn't really lend itself to, you know, the more ephemeral stand up and shut down thing that you might do for developers? You know, do you have a bunch of politics and nonsense in place that, you know, people want to actually sign paper in order to deploy things? So
Yeah, there's lots of craziness.
Yeah. That's a little bit of the transformation that John mentioned. You know, I'm sure that everyone on the phone knows this. I mean, technology is technology, but it's the actual people part that make it difficult. So, good times.
Yeah.
Well, it's coming up on 9:30. I actually have I've got a G+ hanging out coming up for some other things that we're doing within the you know, overall community. So I got to be jumping here in a minute. But does anybody else have any questions or need anything before we go? If not, and this show's been fun, John. Thank you.
And you know what? I'm going to tell everybody out there, I'm going to follow up, and I'm going to make a video with this working so that you guys know that it works. Because I feel really little bad here that things kind of tanked in my lab this evening, but I'll bring it back up and I'll actually maybe do a video or something and post it on my blog or something that says, here's it working. Just so.
Or on professionalvmware.com, you know.
Oh yeah, or on the vBrownBag. There you go. But I'll make sure to definitely do a follow-up there.
Cool. Ronald, I don't understand the question. Let's see. I think his is the last question. And
Is it?
Joey, where is this the longest vBrownBag ever? No, it's not actually. There's one that I can think of that was over 2 hours long.
It's the show that never ends.
Yeah. Does VCAC handshake with VCOps capacity dashboard is Ronald's question.
So basically, he wants to know that if there's any integrations with VCAC and the Cap IQ stuff that got thrown into vCenter operations, and today, no. Not right off the bat. It doesn't know about vCenter operations.
Okay. Well, I'm sure it will in the future.
Now, you potentially could do something with VCO to make that happen, just not out-of-the-box functionality.
Right. All righty. Well, I think that covers everything. We've got all the questions answered. So cool. Well, thank you very much, John.
Okay.
Everyone else, thanks for participating. Thanks for your questions. If you have any questions, you can always hit John up. He is at the VCAC guy on Twitter. I am at 6footdad. You can hit up the overall podcast at vBrownBag or tweet the vBrownBag hashtag. And so with that, thank you, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday at 7:30 Central.
Thank you.